go green and we'll be ready.
Okay, it's 1 o'clock. Let's call this meeting to order. This is the 2021 budget study session and approval. I'm going to let our staff take over and go from there.
Okay. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and kick off the budget study session and review. You know, it's a tighter timeline than normal this year, so usually a lot of this stuff is being done in April, and so we've moved it into May. Obviously, with the pandemic and some things going on, it needed to slip a little bit. I think the thing I was going to highlight was the key dates, and today's meeting was really kind of seeking approval of the budget as well as being a study session. We need to get the budget filed with the city clerk by May 15th, and then they've actually got the planning and zoning meeting scheduled to review the capital improvement plan on May 21st. So that'll take place May 21st. And then if we were going to pursue rate increases, we'd have a public rate hearing in June. And actually, we've adjusted the plan and adjusted some projects over the weekend this morning, and we're going to probably request deferring any rate increases for the water system. With the GAC project, there's a rate plan that's been approved by the board, but not really implemented yet. So that plan's still being pursued. But I think by the time Abe and everybody gets through going through the information, we feel pretty comfortable about deferring that rate increase for a little bit, and then kind of recognizing the current environment that we're in. But like I said, we'll cover the financial information, see what the board sentiment is towards that recommendation. And then we got a handout that we've updated on the capital improvement projects. You know, facility modifications, project line item has been adjusted. The AMI schedule got adjusted. Water main renewal and replacements has been changed as well. And some of this is just kind of timing adjustments. And then the sanitary sewer overflow projects has been reduced as well. So there's several line items that we've adjusted over the weekend. With that being said, you know, we're still pursuing an extension policy and looking at system extension cost. You know, revenue producing projects and the overall economic development initiatives that may be taking place in the community is kind of an outstanding line item out there that with adequate reserve funding, I think we're in a good place to handle those. But there's really not a specific budget line item for those projects. We're going to talk a little bit today about the budgeting process because I know this is the first go around for several of us, me included. And so Abe will be kind of going over the assumptions, financial projections, capital improvements. The transfer fee to the city of Hannibal has actually been increased in the budget 0.5%. We're going to kind of visit a little bit about rates philosophy and overall approach, and that's specifically related to the water treatment plant improvements and debt service coverage. And then we're going to talk a little bit about reserve funding, and then we're going to change kind of the way we're investing reserve funding. We think we can get about another 50 basis points, you know, above what we're receiving right now, but making some changes.
About 5 times as much.
About 5 times as much. So, you know, we were receiving some pretty good interest rates up until about this year, and so it's kind of within the investment policy that we can do so, and we'll probably even get FDIC insurance along with it. So that's something that we're going to be doing over the next month or two. The capital improvement program we're going to talk about extensively, and then the one thing I think everybody knows is the stormwater interim plan. We're really not going to have a full-blown solution to the stormwater situation, but I think when you look at the budget, we've got an interim plan in place. We definitely have the North Street and Union Street restoration projects and repairs that's going on. We're looking at probably $1 million to $1.5 million of matching funds, even if we get those grant funding in place. And then we're going to kind of look at necessary repairs and maintenance to minimize risk exposure and overall cost. So kind of before you, we've got action items that's for the staff, even after we get through with the budget process, is developing a stormwater business plan, hoping to have that done by December 31st. We're going to create and review financial and operational performance and assess the need for water rates around November. And then in December, we're going to put together another 5-year capital improvement plan for the board to review. In January, we're shooting for a joint strategy session and planning meeting with City Council. And then we're going to try to finalize the 5-year plan in February, with the strategic plan being approved in March, and then going full circle, coming back to the board in April for the operating plan and budget approval. So probably some of the tweaks we're going to make is kind of looking at the overall rate needs of the water system developing a little bit of a strategic and 5-year operating plan that has financial statements for all respective of those years, and then developing the business plan for the stormwater system to start addressing some of those needs that's definitely facing the community. So that's kind of the high-level initiative that we have kind of planned and goals and objectives that we have for today. Before Abe kind of goes in and starts doing line item by line item, does that sound like, sounds acceptable to everybody? So,
Yes.
okay. With that being said, Abe and Matt and staff really have, the last few weeks, we really worked hard trying to come up with a really good plan. I think you're going to see that the financial statements are solid, and then the deferral of the rate increase is probably a good thing for the community and the right thing to do. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Abe, and he can kind of start covering it. So
Sounds good, Ken. Move around here so I can see everybody with that. Hurting my neck, if that's okay. First off, I just want to thank Ken and Matt and all the department supervisors for the time they put in. These two guys sat here and endured 4 or 5 hours of spreadsheets with me the other day on the overhead, and so I appreciate all their help and time and effort. Of course, the goal of the budget is to create a financial roadmap for our operational and capital spending and revenues for the next year, which reflects realistic and accurate estimates of our utilities operations. Before I hand out our little updated capital spending and stuff, I just kind of thought I'd walk through the budget process so you guys kind of know what goes into it and where these assumptions and stuff are drawn from. First thing I do for revenue is I review the monthly sales reports for each of the last 12 months for each of our utilities, electric, water, and sewer, to determine revenues by customer class. I drop all those into a spreadsheet so I can then model changes by customer charge, usage charge, that kind of thing. I noticed the electric fund revenues were down about 5% from the previous year due to what I feel are probably changes in consumption habits among our customers, as well as the mild weather. I expect this trend in electric revenues to continue in the new year as a result of continued changes in consumption habits, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic probably reducing tourism and things like that. I left electric rates, the model represents unchanged electric rates, so flat electric rates, as we expect savings in purchase power to roughly offset these lower revenues I just talked about. I want to note this budget projects by the end of next fiscal year, electric fund will achieve its maximum cash reserves, but we do have some anticipated large capital spending items on the horizon. For the water fund, I expected gallon sales to be generally consistent. In the budget packet that went out, I presented 2 variations of the budget, one with the 3.5% rate increase we already kind of talked about in the past, and one without. However, as of this morning, we were able to kind of reassess some capital spending items, and like Ken alluded to, I feel like we can do a balanced budget that shows positive cash contribution with no rate increases in the water fund at this time. In the sewer fund, I expect gallons treated to be consistent, and the rates there were left unchanged also. For expenses, of course, we have to have expenses to make our business happen, unfortunately. I presented each department supervisor with their department's fiscal year-to-date budget, actual numbers compared to budget. I annualized these expenses and compared them with the prior fiscal year to kind of arrive at a budget number for each of their expense line items. Wages were based on the actual wages and hours worked for each position in our utility. Electric fund purchase power, of course, is a major expense item, and I considered several variables, such as the current Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, MISO, wholesale pricing, operational factors such as the Prairie State Power Plant, current capacity costs, etc. The next place we use our cash is capital expenditures. So what we see in this budget here is the first year of our 5-year capital plan. We do modify some of these based on reprioritization, actual timing of those kinds of the actual expenditures. Debt service expenditures, the last item there, is the easiest. Those just come off the amortization schedules for each of our bonds and capital leases. So budget results. So with our modifications, I'll show you here in a minute. So assuming no rate increases in any of our utilities, all funds are able to maintain a positive cash contribution. I'll kind of skip my next section there because it's not relevant anymore. We do expect total utility revenues to decrease by approximately $1 million based on those consumption habits and the effects of the ongoing pandemic, which fortunately we expect to be more than offset by a decrease of approximately $1.8 million in expenses. I like to think of things in the terms of the average residential customer. So in the terms of the average household that uses about 900 kilowatt hours of power and about 3,300 gallons of water, and we treat that much wastewater, the budget assumes that their average electric bill will decrease by approximately $7 a month, which will more than offset the increase in the transfer fee that Ken mentioned of about 80 cents a month. So on the data provided there, we have probably more numbers than anybody wants to see, but we try to, of course, model each utility because each one is a separate utility standing on its own. So each department in that utility, the revenues for each of those utilities, et cetera. And so the action request at the end of our study session, we're going to ask you to approve this budget as presented with any modifications you request so we can deliver it to City Hall by our May 15th deadline. That's the process and the work that went into it. And I'll give you the modified capital plan and the budget summary that resulted from that. Most of these are pretty in color, unfortunately. I've printed a few gray. Say those. That's my last name. It's on too. Well, now you get one too. You're an engineer. You see stuff in black and white anyway.
Truth hurts.
I have one extra. Danny, you'd like one? So this represents our 5-year plan. And sadly, in the board packet that went out, I neglected to include my cover memo for the 5-year plan. We're required to deliver to the City Hall by January 31st of each year for eventual presentation at the Planning and Zoning Committee, this 5-year capital plan. We did this as required. This plan both fulfills our duty per city charter, as well as forms the beginning of our annual budgeting process, as well as helps guide our utilities vision for key equipment and infrastructure investments to be made over the next several years. So, and what I highlighted there were several changes to the plan, additions, modifications, subsequent to what the board had approved back in January. And there were 3 or 4 subsequent changes that Ken and Matt and I discussed. The first one of those is item A4, facility improvements. This had been budgeted to be $400,000 for various modifications to traffic flow, customer flow, et cetera, here in the service center. We've decided that we should reduce that to about $50,000 for each of the next 2 years, mainly to cover things like physical security, response to the COVID pandemic, things like that. We've deferred the bulk of that out to the third fiscal year presented. Next item that was modified compared to what you guys saw in your board packet is item A5, the meter change out, the AMI to AMR conversion, based on just the actual timing of these equipment purchases and et cetera. That $800,000 will be split kind of on a calendarization there over 2 different fiscal years. Keep going. I think the next one is not back till water. Not shown here but I did show on the summarized capital plan as item number W1 in the water fund. We expect the replacement of water mains to actually be $100,000 in fiscal year 21 instead of the $200,000 shown. The next change we'll see is back on the sewer fund, item number S2, downtown sanitary sewer overflow elimination. We expect that project to actually be $250,000 in the upcoming fiscal year and kind of ramping up over time, which was a modification from the previous flat $500,000 per year there. So if I've done my spreadsheets right, I do make mistakes, but if you keep on flipping back, you'll see a 2-page snapshot from our capital projects list from the operating budget. Kind of looks like this, smaller font. And so we have an amount reduced column over there. And so if you see for items A4 and A5, they're now showing at $50,000 for the upcoming year and $400,000 respectively. And I made a note there, we reduced the scope of the facility improvements. We spread the meter conversion out over 2 fiscal years. As we got on the page about halfway down, item number W1, the water line replacement, reflects a scope reduction there. 2/3 of the way down the page, item number S2 reflects a scope reduction in the SSO elimination. So So kind of flipping over to the second page shown there, those items total about $1.1 million, either reduced in scope or deferred, et cetera. So the very last page, I hope you have there, is this 2-page side-by-side snapshot. I'm sorry, one page showing updated budget compared to last year's budget. Mm-hmm. You guys see that?
Yeah.
You had 2 of these pages in your packet that went out, one that reflected the 3.5% water increase and one that did not. So this one does reflect these capital changes we've made. It reflects no rate increase, and it shows the cash contribution for each of our utilities with those assumptions. As you can see, sewer has increased from what you would have seen in your first packet to reflect those changes. Water is showing a positive cash contribution, and electric is also showing a positive cash contribution. Stormwater, unfortunately, is not, continues to not, and that's a kind of a different discussion topic. So this, what you're seeing here reflects the budget as kind of changed from Friday to today to reflect the reprioritization, the kind of the updated estimates for those capital projects, the timing of those, the scope of those, et cetera. I feel like it's a budget. It's definitely realistic. I don't think there's any pie in the sky assumptions here for revenues or expenses. I think they're realistic of what it takes to run our business. As far as purchase power, as far as what we expect to generate in revenue. And I'm pleased to see the kind of results it shows as far as cash contribution, of course, is actual increase in cash in the bank. Accounting is funny stuff. It has depreciation, different expenses. This is actually what we're going to bring in, what we're going to spend for both operating expenses as well as capital spending, what we're going to spend for debt service to pay our debts, and then how the bank account changes at the end of the year after all that's done. That's a lot of numbers, a lot of me talking. Do you guys have any questions, or is there? That's my process. That's the results.
Shannon had a few minutes to talk ahead of time, so if y'all, I kind of got a little bit of this early, so if y'all have questions, please jump in.
And we did. I mean, Abe and Matt's done a great job. I mean, kind of here last minute, we kind of went back through and looked at the capital expenditures and tried to get it timeline right, try to be reflective of the current needs over the next 12 months, and just trying to be prudent with the decisions we're making to make sure it lines up well for the customers, and recognizing some of the needs in the water system are going to continue to be there. But we were able to levelize some of these expenditures without really changing the risk profile for the systems. And then the debt service payment actually starts coming in on 2022. So the principal payment's going to start taking place
On the water GAC.
on the water GAC project. So that's one thing that's hanging out there, that unless something changes, we're still going to have to do some type of rate adjustments, but you hate to be too far ahead of that at this point. And then the stormwater system, most likely we're going to need $1.5 million to really fully utilize the grant funding. So that's something that's hanging out there that the board needs to be aware of, that there's going to have to be some capital advance to the stormwater system. 2 years ago, there was $1 million loan given from the electric system to the stormwater system. There's about $250,000 remaining of the loan. And then you've got this $1.5 million out there for North Street and Summit, I think is what's in the budget, or Union, North Street and Union. And then there's also several line items of projects that needs to be done to kind of mitigate some of the risk on the stormwater side. So when you take the water rate increase out, it kind of just zeroes in on the stormwater system.
Hey, what's the reason for the big difference in percentage change of the interest and dividend there in the operating expenses for
The Federal Reserve's rate cut, the fact that the cut in interest rates in the market, the Federal Reserve rate cuts, like Ken alluded to in his kind of opening remarks there, we were getting 2% roughly on our cash sweep account here at our local bank. That got reduced to 0.1% just in the month of March.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's reasonable.
Yeah,
Days.
so we're taking some steps to, starting today, we're going to wire some money to our investment advisor, buy some CDs, a ladder of CDs that we can earn around 50 or 0.5 or 0.6% on that, which is a lot less than we were getting before, but better than we can do otherwise. I try to be realistic in that I took our weighted average balances, our weighted average interest rates, and tried to reflect interest accordingly. It's a good time to be a borrower and a bad time to be a saver right now.
Still, 0.5 is better
Yes. Percentage-wise, it's five or six times better.
I had a couple just curiosity questions. They're not even big ticket items. I'm just more curious for my own satisfaction. The aerial imaging, is that something we're hiring out?
It is.
Because Google's not up to date enough to do it?
This would be a very precise down to the square foot matter.
Yeah, it's pretty accurate image. Thought behind that is we can use it for planning, not just for main purpose of it would be impervious area for stormwater calculations, but then planning for any of the other utilities as well.
Cool. I just want to make sure we weren't buying a really fancy hovercraft.
A drone out there.
Yeah, a $45,000 drone.
A big drone for Matt to fly around.
Yeah.
I got when I did appraising, I used a USGA website that Web Soil Survey is the name of it.
Okay.
That really is accurate as we need to be for drainage. It's easy to document as you go through it. It takes about 10 minutes to do a site, so it's pretty quick. And I'm sure Joe could figure out how to use that pretty quickly. If not, he can call me.
Okay.
So, some of the biggest variances in this budget, none of us can claim any credit for. We had a capacity contract that expired. In our electric utility, we have to own or control the generation capacity sufficient to service our entire maximum, peak load plus a margin there. We had a 25 megawatt contract that expired this year. The auction pricing was virtually nil, so that line item alone saved us $700,000. Wholesale power pricing is down about 25% compared to a year ago. There was an article this day in the Wall Street Journal about that. It's a nationwide phenomenon. Started even before the pandemic, very low natural gas prices. So we expect that trend to largely continue. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good when it comes
Does
to
that have to be replaced with something?
what's that now.
Does that contract or agreement have to be replaced with
We
something?
did. We chose to go into the open. There's an auction. You can either buy ahead, like contract ahead of it before the auction, or you can just go to the auction. Our decision at the time was that we already had 2/3 of our capacity covered by Prairie State as well as our diesel generators, and based on historical auction prices the last few years trending so low, we thought it was prudent to go to the auction this year. It turned out to save us about 95% compared to what our previous contract had been. It saved us about 50% compared to what a current contract would have been.
Is there any risk in
Yes, it could have come
6
in.
months from now the market goes crazy?
No, it's an annual auction.
Oh.
So for capacity, purchase power is a daily settlement. We have hedged our risk there with block purchases for our peak summer months, June, July, August, and September. Some of them was high heat, bigger cooling load months. We have 20 or 25 megawatts during our peak days and peak hours hedged at that in the energy. So energy is kind of a funny thing. Or electricity is kind of a funny thing. So there's energy, the stuff that actually spins the meter, and there's capacity, the ability to actually crank out the power. We're responsible for both capacity and energy. And so capacity is an annual auction. Energy is actually every hour. They reset prices, and you can see massive changes throughout the day. And we contract with a power supply consultant to schedule our load ahead and the day ahead of energy.
That's one thing you'll see on the transmission side of things. Ameren and all the larger utilities have quite a few transmission projects out there, substation projects as well, that could impact us at some point. So we've got some line items out there to do some substation improvements. But the more investment they make into the transmission grid, the more available that power is, so you get a cheaper access to it. And the one thing you're seeing with the pandemic is those transmission constraints are really not as great because there's a lot of load coming off the system because there's been a downturn in the requirements and demand on the power. So with power stations not really doing their outages because of the pandemic and not having the personnel on site to do the maintenance, there's a whole lot of supply on the marketplace. And then with the actual customer demand going down, you don't have the transmission constraints and bottlenecks. So the cheaper energy is actually flowing a little bit more effectively right now. And Abe did a really good job of explaining it, but that's some of the things that we're seeing, over the next 3, 4, 5 months that may continue for the rest of the year, depending upon how this all plays out.
You know, we had previously seen about a $4 per megawatt hour congestion charge at Prairie State, trying to get those electrons on the grid. Like Ken said, with lower, our consultants are now expecting more like a $1 per megawatt hour haircut there, which really helps. I mean, that's to the tune of, you know, several $100,000 a year, or a few $100,000 a year. Speaking of capital projects, items number E1 and E2 on the capital plan here, they were on your packet that went out Friday, but these were subsequently added from the packet that the board approved back in January. These are very big ticket items. Like Ken said, they're very important items, both financially and for our city's, you know, distribution and transmission grid. Item number E1, and Matt and Ken will speak to these way better than I could, but this is just a tie line between the Oakwood and Southside substations. This would close in our 34.5 loop around the city, adding, like I noted, flexibility and reliability to the system. And it's that $2.5 million is pretty current and accurate pricing on that from our design engineer. Item number E2 is basically we're going to take part in a joint venture project to build a new substation somewhere to be determined outside of the floodplain to replace the Marion substation in my Mark Twain Cave. This one has a lot of positives to it. It would allow us to reduce our wholesale distribution charge that Ameren assesses us. It also, of course, get our substation out of the floodplain. It also increased the capacity of that substation, so it could bring more power to town. Lots and lots of good things. It allows us to abandon the functionally obsolete 73 line. I do expect these projects to be financed in some considerable portion. Depending on our cash reserves funding at the time, we could pay cash for more of that, but we would need to locate and secure capital financing of some sort for those.
So what's the payback on that?
It's about a 25-year payback, I believe. So, but it's of course, a 50-year asset. 25 years, but 20 or 25 years on the current charges from Ameren, but those tend to go up over time.
On expanding that loop, is there any towers involved, or is it just putting wires on existing infrastructure?
I have to
We're
ask
looking at both. You'd have to build a pole line between here and Fifth Street, or we're looking at the cost differential between that or going underground. We do not have an existing line that we could.
Is that $2.5 million in your estimation reasonable for that length or distance?
And it doesn't include underground? That's overhead, probably.
I'm
There's
pretty
some-
sure that one's overhead, isn't it, Matt?
I don't know, because there's some complexities with the tying in of other circuits, of the lower voltage circuits. And so we get some cost advantage by going underground. And so this is something we can work with our engineer on, come up with a good pricing estimate. We approved the design contract, I think it was January. And so they've been working on that since about mid-February.
That's always contracted out?
What's that, design one?
No, the actual upgrade of the,
Historically, it hasn't. We just have to see what our ability to do that myself at that time would be. If it was underground, it'd probably be hired out because there'd be boring and such that we don't have the capability.
I want to point out item number E10 under electric also is a solar farm. This is an idea that's been kicked around for a few years. We decided based on just the fact that financially it doesn't make sense. It was financially marginal to begin with, and so we just kind of carried out in a future fiscal year with wholesale pricing falling so far as it has and capacity pricing falling so far as it has. We just don't feel like it makes any financial or economic sense at this time. So we decided to kind of basically permanently defer that item all the way off the 5-year plan at this point. Another major change is item number E11, Indian Mound Substation Rebuild. This has been deferred off to a future year. We've got to do for a few reasons, but not in no small part to the fact that we have these other very large, very more time-bound projects, that tie line and the new substation Item number E16 was electric vehicle charging station. We had thought that we would be able to receive some cost share, some significant cost share funding on that due to the VW diesel emissions settlement. However, we did not make the priority cut for that, so we've deferred that to a future year also.
Are charging stations usually put together by the public organization, or are those usually private?
There's a variety of different ways they do that. Sometimes the proprietary, like the Tesla, will come in and partner with the provider and do that. It's a real chicken and egg conundrum, honestly. MUJMUC, the Missouri Joint Municipal Electric Utility Commission, our joint action agency, as well as Ameren, as well as I believe the co-ops, are trying to get a roadmap for Missouri put together, prioritizing key traffic corridors and trying to get charging stations every 60 to 100 miles, because people don't want to drive their EVs if they can't charge. They're not going to charge if they don't drive EVs. So that's a real.
Is that under an economic development area, maybe, for promotion and for coordination?
They were trying to coordinate the use of these the cost share from VW. It's a real consortium there trying to get that established. I thought we were going to make the cut with our intersection of 2 4-lane roads, our tourism being 120 miles north of St. Louis, et cetera. I was really surprised we didn't make that cut. So to answer Mr. Ortworth's question,
Does Corey have any insights into that at this point?
Well, not on the public side, I know there's a couple of private folks that are looking at those options in town right now that I think Matt, maybe Jared will talk to, so.
yeah, ideally we'd find my own personal Abe Gray opinion, we find a private sector participant to manage that kind of project for us. Not many have stepped forward and been interested, so we were going to try to take a stab ourselves, but the cost share funding was not materialized, and we didn't want to subsidize it, with other electric revenues yet at this time. Item number E18, the last one there on electric. This one is one I'm kind of excited about. It would allow for basically streamline downtown events. When vendors show up to town, there's often a last minute need for electric service. 4 o'clock on a Friday, our CSR, our customer service representatives, are trying to answer that kind of in our service crews. This would be several what we call temporary permanent services downtown that we could dispatch easily with a remote disconnect meter and really streamline, make things more efficient for the events downtown.
Can I add something to that, Abe?
Please.
So I think I sent Ken an email today. We've got a meeting set up on Friday afternoon with Sheridan Valley. Sheridan Valley's approached us about providing wireless for downtown, for events and tourism, et cetera. So it's actually meeting with the chamber, HHMC, city, Ken, a few other folks to discuss that. So from a timing perspective, obviously, if you all are working on this, that's one of the things that Sheridan Valley's they're going to provide the wireless service, but we're going to be looking for some assistance on pole attachments and where we're going to place equipment, those types of things. So that's kind of what Friday afternoon meeting is about, is to have an initial discussion about who needs to be involved in the planning of that, so we can move that forward. So that ties in well, obviously, with that project. For your information.
With items downtown, is there a consideration for burying those also? In other words, you clean it up.
The bad thing is what Sheridan Valley would want to do is actually attach to poles or something higher to get the signal on out. So there's kind of a mixed need there. A lot of utilities are leasing pole space where they can put the antenna up and then they can get a signal to the pole and reflect it up, and they don't have to build a tower structure. And I imagine that's what Sheridan Valley's looking at down there is trying to utilize
Control costs, yeah.
What's already there. So
Most of our electrical equipment is in the alleys anyway.
Okay.
So I think what Jared was envisioning on this was some type of underground to maybe a pedestal or something like that, where we could serve multiple vendor booths.
There's a little bit of that downtown anyway.
There's a little bit.
Yeah.
Yes.
Half a dozen maybe.
Yep.
I was going to mention before I forgot to, Ken had talked about doing a capital advance. Right, the flip side, a benefit of these low interest rates is this would be a very financially advantageous time for the Stormwater Fund to receive a further capital advance from Electric. Its current one on the books is at 2% interest, which was our investing rate at the time. A more realistic rate now would be like a half or a third of a percent, which would, Stormwater utility needs all the help it can get. Matt's trying to make a joke. I'm not going to say it because I'm on a microphone. Don't tempt me, Matt. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys have at all. I'll try to lay out the budgeting process, kind of where we get the numbers.
Steve, on the annual budget, I just don't understand what it's for. There's meter reading and then there's SCADA. Are those the same or are those different?
Two different departments. SCADA stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. It's our dispatch group in the back that also does remote monitoring of our plants and stuff. They're a 24/7 operation, so every single hour of the year there's somebody back there taking emergency customer calls, dispatching crews, etc. Meter reading is the crew that goes out in the field and actually swaps out meters, does disconnects, reconnects, that kinds of thing.
Oh, okay.
They also do our utility locates.
Good point.
Okay, so meter reading isn't really strictly reading meters.
Nope.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's a term that's probably a bit of a misnomer. It refers back to the days when they walked the town with meter books. I should probably change that and call it meter technicians. Or that's a good point. Bring up Mr. Ortworth. We could kind of walk through and just these different departments might be something good to consider and talk about. Administrative and supervisors are folks like me, Ken and Matt, Courtney, Matthew. Basically, our shared cost, things like our permanent insurance, Missouri Intergovernmental Risk Management Association, so our property casualty workers' comp insurance. Economic development falls into here, wages for our administrative folks. Department 5, Information Technology, is Matthew Jones's department. That reflects contracted services for IT, non-capitalized equipment purchases, software, things like that. SCADA is the dispatch group we just talked about. Customer accounts, Department 11, shows a lot of dollars, but the vast bulk of that is transfer fees and sales taxes that we collect and pass on through. It'd also be the wages for our customer service representatives up front and some of their postage and different things like that. Meter reading is the metering department we just talked about. Department 21, electric distribution. The bulk of that is, of course, purchase power. It's our wholesale energy capacity. It's our prairie-state commitments, as well as the line crew, expense for their vehicles, things like that. Department 30, non-cash. It's depreciation of our assets placed in service. Kind of a good rule of thumb, if you compare Department 30, that $4.1 million, to the third line from the bottom, capital projects, $5.4 million, it would make sense that our capital expenditures would always be similar or greater than our depreciation. Depreciation is an accounting shenanigan, an accounting process where you take something and you write off over 5 to 50 years, depending what it is. And so that's historical cost, whereas that $5.4 million is actual current dollars, but it takes, what we're buying things at today.
So the big increase under the water from 900 to 1.2 is mainly for operation of the new water system?
Depreciation on the new water system.
Non-cash, okay.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
I took that $10 million divided over 30 years, and so it added $300,000 depreciation to that. Department 31, general maintenance, we have maintenance mechanics and maintenance electricians, so that's their wages as well as their materials and vehicle expense. They provide a variety of maintenance services around our utility. Department 41, water distribution, that's wages, vehicle expense, materials for the folks that take care of our water mains. Department 50, debt service, that's interest on our different debts. In the electric fund, we have capital leases on our generators. In the water fund, we have state revolving funds, and as well as the revenue bonds to build the GAC facility. In the sewer fund, we have the revenue bonds that we sold recently to refinance the previous revenue bonds. Department 51 is water treatment. That represents wages, utility costs like electricity for water pumping, chemical cost, materials, lab supplies, professional fees to run the water filter plant. Department 61 Stormwater represents wages, professional fees, use of equipment and manpower from other departments in the utility. Department 71 is sewer collection. That represents salaries, vehicle expense, materials, small tools for the sewer collection crew. Department 81 is sewer treatment. That represents utilities, chemicals, wages, supplies, things to run the wastewater treatment plant. And then fringe benefits is just things like the retirement plan, the health benefits, the payroll taxes for wages across the entire company. So each department picks up its wages. Department 90 picks up all the fringe overhead on those wages. Then to arrive at cash contribution, we take those non-cash charges, depreciation, add those back to expense. Then we subtract off the actual capital outlay and debt principal to actually show on kind of on a cash basis, because the top 2/3 of the budget is accrual. Accrual is kind of fitting for accounting. But anyway, then we arrive at cash at the bottom there.
I think the one thing that's good to point out, though, when you look at operating expenses being a multiple discipline utility, a lot of those expenses get distributed over each of the systems, where a lot of times you get the synergies, and so, electric picks up 50% or 60% or whatever an appropriate allocation would be for each of those respective functions. But having multiple utilities, you get to spread those costs out, so you don't have one utility absorbing 100% of any of those expenditures. So it's a real positive thing for efficiencies and synergies, a part of that. So any of those line items that you see that goes directly across each category means it's being allocated or distributed based upon
Good point.
the support for each of them.
I really don't have any further comments on the budget, unless you guys have any further questions.
I mentioned earlier I had 2 questions, but my second question, you'd already beat me to the punch on that. I was gonna talk a little bit about the meter change out, so.
I have a few items that I marked when I initially went through here, but most of them are fairly minor in nature. The Matt can probably answer. Just
We'd be happy to do it now, Bill.
well, it's more about me understanding that sort of thing.
Sure. I mean, if you have a question, Mr. Dees, I'm sure other folks in the room do too. So, go ahead.
They're pretty minor. But the sequence of, I just noticed this one this morning when I took a second look. SSO vac trucks. I think we have 2 and we're ordering another one. And that may just be the depreciation out.
I think that the one that you're talking about that's in there is before
Page 9, by the way.
Page 9. I think it's the one for the water crew and line crew to use for pothole and utilities while we're out cleaning sewers with the other 2. Right now, we get pulled off to do that. That would be for a third machine that would be dedicated to those 2 departments.
Did I see that right as a trailer?
I think that's what they were proposing, yes.
Yeah.
Under S9, replacement with LED, is that pretty typical what we're doing with most of our light operations? We're going to LED.
Yes.
We're also installing LED actual street lights around town. That's our new design that we're
Using those.
We are.
Okay, makes sense.
About
The
80.
payback's pretty
Yep.
quick on
about
that.
90% more efficient than the others.
S16 metal roof or a roof replacement. That's pretty far out though. That's 5 years. It's just I'm always thinking long term. It's better to invest in a higher quality material now than putting shingles on, as opposed to a rubber roof or steel roof. That sort of
Yeah,
thing.
this is, when we did the upgrade in 2014, 2015 at the wastewater plant, this was the only building that did not have the roof replaced because it was built after the original plant was built. And so it's just, out there in 24, 25, it'd be time for that roof to be replaced. It'd be approximately 30, 35 years old at that time.
Yeah.
So,
Just like home, those things wear out.
yep.
Our industry is amazing to me that these things on this list, we buy stuff, almost everything we build has a useful life longer than any of us in this room. It's like every single thing we construct or contract for is going to outlive us. It's not every single thing, but many of these are, will serve the utilities for decades and decades.
Yeah, that pretty much covers my minor items.
Anybody else?
No.
I did have a question on the meters, A5. Are those the automatic?
Disconnect?
Yeah.
They are. It'll be a citywide deployment of the remote disconnect meters. Over time, that'll allow for a lot more flexible payment options for the customers. They can do prepayments and things
Yeah.
like that.
Do we do that with water also, or how are those read?
Water's not automatic disconnect. We follow up with the department, the metering department here to take care of the water.
They will be read remotely, yes.
Remotely?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Read remotely, not.
Yeah,
not
as long as you can, yeah, you're not going in basements, you're not
Nope.
looking in backyards, that kind of thing.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. They're remotely read, but not remotely disconnected for water.
We haven't done manual meter read since 2004 here.
Great. Good.
And the remote disconnect is only going to be for residential single phase. It will not be for commercial at this time.
That would cover about 90% of our customer accounts.
When we replace radio hardware, A6, with the new technology, is that, I'm thinking the old, squawk box kind of stuff is out of a station, like police, is that different?
No, that's what
Yeah,
I mean, that's
you're
just-
looking to upgrade to something higher technology.
it'd be similar type, two-way radio. I mean, all of our trucks are equipped with them now.
Yeah.
That's how our dispatch communicates with trucks, so it'd be just updating to the newer equipment that would be supported.
We experienced during that F0 tornado of cell towers and stuff being
Yes.
not in service, and so we found a lot of resilience and usefulness of radio in the past.
Is that is the police department still using that kind of format, or what do they use?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. I'm just wondering, how you upgrade that to so you're not doing it often. But we're all accustomed to cell phones. That's all. I'm sorry, I digressed a little bit.
No, we're here to learn. It's a learning workshop, not an Abe tells you how it's going to be workshop. I have done the budget here for several years, and I feel like we have a good process. Of course, we're always trying to find better ways to do it, and I do apologize for it being a month later. If my appendix were still in my abdomen, we would have been having this conversation before. But
Is it in a jar somewhere?
well, I tried to bring it home. They wouldn't let me. I thought I'd put it in a little
Does that sound like a numbers guy to
I was going to put it in a little pint jar.
souvenir
alcohol.
on the mantle?
Yeah, no, they sliced it and diced it, and they said you can't take it home. I said,
But it was mine. I
where
paid
do I
for
get my
it.
money's worth here, guys? The food was good, but I couldn't take my. Not too many channels on TV. The Star Wars marathon ran out. I was up a creek after that. Anyway, happy to support local healthcare industry. Well, no, I wasn't happy. Glad they took care of me. It's more fun to be here than it is to lay in a hospital bed.
Absolutely.
I think the one thing we continually hear is economic development, and Corey's here, but probably the one line item we'll probably add for the next year's budget is kind of a revenue producing or economic development extensions. I think with the new subdivisions, that's something that is going to continue to grow and be a little bit of an issue. And then how do you extend your system in a good economic and wise way? So that's probably just something to think about down the road. That's probably not necessarily in this, in this budget, but.
So is the contribution that the BPW pays to economic development in there somewhere?
It is. It's in Department 2, administrative. It's split funded 50% in electric, 25% each in water and sewer. And it's at $120,000 per the contract.
Anybody got anything else?
We would just ask the board, make a motion and approve this budget reflecting the amendments that we discussed, the capital amendments, changes.
Well, I think the changes y'all have made are very good, especially in these times. I am sure that the public will appreciate that, and our customers.
Just to reiterate, this budget reflects no rate increases for any utility.
Is there a way we can put together a Q&A on that? Because people will have questions.
Frequently asked questions.
And, if we post that, public wants to know, and That's a way of kind of being ahead of the story.
Yep. Yeah, the only change the public will see on their bill effective in July is the increase in the transfer fee, depending on usage, around 80 cents to $1 a month.
Including the, the fact that you're holding the line, and why.
I guess the question I have, and I hadn't thought about this until now, but on the money that would be advanced to the stormwater system, would that just be an amendment to the existing agreement? You brought up adjusting the interest rates, so
I would propose refinancing.
would we need to bring that back to the board?
We would.
for-
We'd ask
Okay.
James Lemon or his associates there I'd propose refinancing the existing agreement because it's already had the principal deferred a couple of
Okay.
years. It's at a higher interest rate than our current market or foregone opportunity cost of interest. So I would
Yeah.
propose rolling that existing loan into a new one and advancing more funding off of that.
Well, that's another action item then. Either the next board meeting, depending on James's schedule, it'll either be brought before the board for approval in May or June. So that's an action item that's not currently on the list, and we'll put that out there. So adjusting the agreement and the advancement to the stormwater system to get us through the next 12 months. Correct.
And we could do it as, we could even structure the agreement so we could draw down funds as needed, so we're not giving the stormwater a
Right.
big slug of money that they have to pay interest on right away, just kind of scheduling that to meet the capital needs.
Well, somebody like to make a motion?
A motion to approve the budget as amended from our initial distribution to those today.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a second. With that, all in favor?
Aye.
Do we need to do a individual on that one? On the budget? Okay. Okay, moving on to board meeting date and time approval. I had made this suggestion at our last meeting. I thought of something this morning, sitting out drink coffee. I told you all that I wanted to see you all get home to your families and have evening lives without interruption from us. And it hit me that I better ask if that's going to interfere with your daily lives here. Is it drawing you away from things you need to do? It's a tough one. It's a tough one for you to answer.
No, from our standpoint,
drinking coffee, right?
we will accommodate whatever you guys want to do.
Okay.
So,
Fair enough.
so you said it, and we'll make sure it happens.
Okay.
So
I did, I don't know if John's in the situation I'm in, but I did talk with my employer, and they would express a desire that if I could stay at work until at least 3 o'clock. So if that's okay, that would put us at more like a 3:30 start time. Would that work for the rest of you guys?
I'm retired.
Is that something we need to make motions on, or?
You don't have to, but if you want to, you can. It has been done in the past.
Okay, somebody like to make a motion?
So what date would we be talking about?
Still doing it on the same days, it's always on the third Monday.
of the month at 3:30 p.m.
Motion to make the date for the board meetings, third Monday of the month at 3:30.
Do we have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion is passed. Then we've got a calendar of events that I'm assuming is just for discussion. It's nice to have that, by the way.
yeah, we wanted to go ahead and put together a calendar of events because we do value your time, so you guys can plan ahead and see what's coming place in each month and kind of keep that out there in front of you. I think it's kind of laid out. We definitely want to get some board education and orientation going. And then right now, probably the one that's already kind of set is on August 17th, Jackson Lewis, one of the attorneys we have under retainer will be here to kind of talk about social media training. And then I'll be visiting with APPA. They have a board orientation program that's been done here in the past, and it's about a half-day event, and I'm going to visit with them tomorrow. If that's something that the board would like to do, we'll try to get that scheduled maybe in June or July. But really, the calendar of events was just kind of an idea to give you guys some information so you can plan and make sure we're valuing your time and kind of lay it out there so we're staying on schedule with things. And then it's even got the election dates and deadlines and stuff that has to be in place if we had a ballot issue. So we were going to try to keep that out there rolling about every 12 to 14 months, for you guys to refer to. So that's the intent of it.
No, really like it. One of the things that, just for the other three of you, that was kind of a takeaway for me, went to the last city council meeting, and I got the impression that they really enjoyed and would like to have some of us there each meeting, if we can make it. I mean, we all have lives too, so we might not make all of them, but the one thing we've got to be careful of is to communicate between each other, and we can't have three of us there. Two's all we can have at a city council meeting, or we are in a quorum, which would violate our rules. So any of y'all that want to go, I'm going to try to go to most of them, so let me know. And if there's a couple of y'all want to go, I'll back out of one. It's not a big deal.
I'll try to make as many as I can.
You used to go to all of them, didn't you?
Your phone.
I'd like to bring up a question for the audience. For it. Gallery, not audience.
I'm in the amen corner back.
Can you think of anything that can be done better, faster, more efficient, more dollars? Any strategy that might allow for maximum funding or grants or government programs that are available for the stormwater problem that we have in Hannibal?
For stormwater, yeah, so that'd be more difficult, obviously, than the typical economic development grant
true,
process.
true.
However, there could potentially be some community development block grant dollars available through the community development program, possibly even some, there could be possibly some other programs through Mark Twain Regional Council of Governments too, but I think, typically on the economic development side, which I think is probably what you're referring to, John, is those are typically triggered by job creation. So usually you've got to have a bird in hand on a project to get the economic development funding for those types of things. So
No, not really. It really wouldn't fall under economic development. It would fall under
just
probably community development, block grants, or any other funding. And that's unfair to ask you that because it's probably handled by somebody who is a grant writer for utilities. So
yeah, so we've been, part of the process of trying to identify funding for the North Street project with Matt and the Union Street project and several of the other projects. So those are the types of programs that you're talking about. So obviously emergency funding brings in a whole separate bucket. The challenge to all of that is there's various buckets of funding that you qualify for based on what the scenario is. So emergency funding is completely different with like Union Street, for instance, because of what happened there. So that's why we're receiving the emergency CDBG funding to help offset those costs. So, on the economic development side, as I mentioned, they're typically driven by job creation. The nice thing about that is they don't count against you with your other community development block grant projects you might have going on in the community. That is one of the challenges on the community development side when we're looking at streets and water and sewer for those CDBG projects is you can typically only have a couple of those or one of those at a time depending on the size of those projects. And so you've sort of got to plan those things out. And that's one of the things that the city council recently discussed given the Union Street project and the North Street project. Because after the EDA funding went away, we had talked to CDBG again about some emergency funding for that. And so at the time, the council had to make a choice between Union Street and North Street as to which one was more important. So now we've been able to identify a different funding source possibly for the North Street piece, and so that emergency funding will go back to the Union Street. So that's the challenge I think we face here is that we have so many of those types of things that we need to address that we'll have to plan accordingly, and then know obviously that emergencies like Union Street are going to happen from time to time. But typically in a scenario like that, that does bring about flooding. Obviously, is another example there's any of those types of emergencies, we get a disaster declaration and those kind of things, and that creates another new bucket of potential funding. It's our understanding from the federal legislators that, you know, who knows where this stands now given COVID, but the federal administration had planned on a significant infrastructure component again. That's recently brought us some buckets of funding that weren't always there. You know, the governor's cost share last year, for instance, at the state level was a bucket that wasn't there before. So there's lots of those sort of special infrastructure related components that are going on now, which we're constantly talking with those folks about to make sure that we're maximizing the value for the community. So that's a long answer. I apologize.
No,
It really depends on the circumstance.
yeah.
You know, I think long term, you know, most of those projects are to be leveraged as assistance, either for emergency or stretching local dollars. So I think obviously the stormwater utility is the important piece of that, to be able to say that we have, you know, a recognized funding source to deal with these things long term, and we would be using other funding sources to supplement that to stretch those dollars. That puts us in a much better position to be able to access those dollars than just not having any revenue source and then consistently having to go out and try to find something to pay, you know, 100%, which is difficult.
That's why when we try to put the plan together, being able to leverage these low interest rates, if you have a funding source, you can get it financed. If you have a funding source, you can get grants, you know, so you can kind of get some seed money and get some revenue stream coming in, then you can really leverage those dollars for the benefit of the community. So that's probably a top goal for us, to try to figure out how to get that funding source in place, so we can go out and maybe get some financing and do some improvements that make a whole lot of sense and that really would improve, you know, the community overall. So easier said than done. That's kind of the goal, you know. So hopefully you can turn $1 into $2 or $3 for the benefit of it. So.
What else we got? Any more questions, guys? Looks like that's about it. If there's no more questions, I think we're ready to, are we gonna talk about the funding for stormwater at the next meeting? You didn't need to do anything today, right?
I mean, we don't have any agenda item for it, but we've got like general discussion.
You know, it's general discussion. That's the reason I was trying to get caught up on the action item of bringing that agreement back. I'm assuming that's what we'd want to do is either in May, and depending on James's schedule, we'll either bring that agreement in May and June to address the grants that's in place. Because the $1.5 million that's in this budget is really for about $5.5–6 million worth of repairs that's necessary on the stormwater system. So we're trying to get to this interim phase where we can handle those situations and leverage that grant funding. So there'll be an action item for it. But just as far as approval of the budget goes, that's kind of what's reflected here for today.
Okay.
If you guys have questions, concerns on that, then we'll be more than happy to answer it. But that's kind of the timing of it, Bill.
Yeah, no, I don't have any, but it's a good idea to refinance it anyway, so.
Yeah.
Cool, okay.
Motion to adjourn?
Second. All in favor? Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you, fellas.